I began to ask, can traces of Mary's influence on John be identified? And what would be the nature of the evidence? What would be the appropriate methodology for investigating the question? The possibility of tracing such an influence appealed to me as a scholar because this is the sort of thing scholars think about and wonder if they can demonstrate. For example, as an Aristotle scholar, I have wondered whether the influence of Aristotle can be seen in the late dialogues of Plato. Aristotle was a student in Plato's academy for the last 20 years of Plato's life. And Plato's later dialogues depart in interesting ways from his earlier dialogues, suggesting developments that are explicit in Aristotle's works. Can traces of Aristotle's thought be identified in Plato's works? What evidence can we find of the influence of the famous student on his even more famous teacher? Questions like these are subtle and difficult. Answering them is not unlike a scientist reconstructing a prehistoric creature from a fragment of bone. The gap between the truth of the matter and the available evidence is the source of both the difficulty of the challenge and the wonderfulness of any positive result. The problem of teasing out a personal influence on what was ostensibly an oral presentation of the gospel before it was written down seemed more interesting to me than the usual scholar's problem of reconstructing the final version of a text from hypothetical sources and earlier redactions. And then, the possibility of hearing Mary's song in John's Gospel was appealing to me for some other reasons as well. We are inundated with tired attempts in scholarly and popular biblical exegesis to locate feminism in the Gospel itself. Consider how popular film adaptations alter the Gospel accounts to put female characters, such as Mary Magdalene, in scenes where they surely were not present. Or consider the many popular books with Christian feminist claims, most of which depend upon one or more gross theological errors and reach false conclusions. Jesus was in a romantic relationship with Mary Magdalene, or Jesus would have ordained women, and so on. Yet, despite these failed attempts, there is something right about the intuition. Christianity has been the greatest feminist force in history. The spread of early Christianity depended heavily on its attractiveness to women, especially in the Roman Empire, among Gentiles who resisted various forms of sexual servitude and violence, and the abhorrent exposure of infants. Christianity raised the dignity and status of the wife, making her a genuine partner with the husband. Only Christianity posits that a human woman became the mother of the transcendent God, Theotokos, as the new Eve at the beginning of new creation. Having been taught by my wife and daughters better to esteem the truths of the Christian faith that affirm and elevate the incommensurate dignity of the feminine nature, I was gladdened by the hope of finding elements of this dignity in the life of Christ and the Gospels themselves. Finding, not inventing, imposing, or projecting. Thus, the proposition that at least one of the Gospels might convey something of Mary's outlook and heart seemed delightful and intriguing. To look for her influence here seemed consistent with the organic development of the mind of the Church, and a potentially fruitful way to approach the natural desire of Christian women everywhere to see their office at the origin of the life of the followers of Jesus Christ. The prima facie case. Some basic considerations make this thesis about Mary's influence on John's Gospel antecedently very likely. First, Jesus conferred Mary to John as his mother, and John to Mary as her son. He did so on the cross as nearly his last act before his death. John chapter 19, verses 26 through 27. Traditionally, this act has been counted as the third of 7 last words on the cross. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing near, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the